What's the most thing you have ever done? Story 1. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It was not her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I could not stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have taken it. She could not accept that she just could not remember where she was putting things. The worst time she had a meltdown over photos she had misplaced and had my parents search my room while I insisted that I never touch them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could simply go outside if I wanted to see it, for goodness sakes. One night I woke up because she was calling for me in that nasally trill she always had that I had grown to dread because of her constant accusations. Just my name, over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I did not know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 in the morning. I assumed she was calling for me because she had misplaced something again and was ready to claim I had gone into her private bathroom, that I never went near and taken it. So I thought some very angry words at her and pretended I did not hear her. She called for me for 30 or so more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured there, now my mom can deal with you and I can sleep. Well, it turned out her kidneys had shut down suddenly. She was vomiting and excreting blood that whole time, calling for me, not to accuse me again, but because she needed help. She was 85. That 30 minutes probably did not make a difference, but she passed away a few days later, and while I know it was not my fault, her extended suffering was. I am sorry, Grandma. Story 2, I am a recovered hero addict, 9 years sober, and I have many stories of how unkind I used to be. I really cannot gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can share a story or two. One day I was completely broke and on my last bag of substances. My so-called neighborhood pharmacist had recently been arrested for driving under the influence. Trying to think, I came up with an idea to try and get some prescribed medication at the emergency room. I still had medical insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My friend came by and we were sitting outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get injured just enough to receive some medication, but not enough to have long-lasting consequences. There was this huge concrete block beside my garage, and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of breaking only a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the block trying to convince myself to drop it on my foot. I could not do it. I panicked too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he agreed. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it was not enough damage, so I told him that he needed to lift it higher and drop it again, which he did. So I went to the hospital and told them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement and dropped them when I slipped on the bottom step. I went back, got x-rays, and waited in the room. The doctor came in and told me that I had torn numerous ligaments in my foot and that it probably would have hurt less if I had simply broken it. Hearing this, I was excited, thinking, yes, I was about to get what I wanted. I did not care about the pain at that moment, just happy that I had potentially succeeded. They released me and handed me a prescription. They wrote me a prescription for ibuprofen 800 milligrams. Defeat. Story 3, I am going to mention what my little sister did. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were required to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought our mom was acting strangely and might have been involved with the counselor for her own personal benefit, though it was never confirmed. So we were upset because we loved both our mom and our dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it was difficult watching him be dismissed by the only 2 adult figures who did not support him in that moment. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in his office, and she decided she was going to use his small trash can as a bathroom to assert dominance. It was certainly asserted. We never went back. Story 4. Look, this was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, we, meaning my boyfriend and his family, got Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason that night, it did not sit well with me. An hour after eating, I got that intensely sick feeling, like I had to use the bathroom so urgently that I wanted to throw up. Whatever, I went upstairs and completely overwhelmed the bathroom. It is important to note that there are 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a small apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I was sure my stomach was empty, I went back down to lay in bed. I thought I could rest it off. No. About 30 seconds after laying down, I got the urge to go again. I ran upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms were occupied. His sister refused to get out of the shower even though it was an emergency, and his dad was using the other toilet, presumably dealing with a similar situation to mine. I reluctantly went back to sit in bed and considered my options as the discomfort in my stomach grew worse. Break down the bathroom door and frighten his sister? Make the 30-minute drive home? No, it was too urgent. I even thought about having an accident and dealing with the embarrassment. I really did not want to subject my future in-laws to that. I reluctantly realized my only option was to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open, and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to go without feeling exposed, except for under the trampoline. My thought process was that no one had used the trampoline for years, and it was out of sight and walking range so no one could step in it accidentally. Great. I did what I needed to do, got soaked in the process because it was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me, cleaned up with napkins and wet wipes, and went inside. I immediately threw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, and sickness. I cleaned that up and went straight to bed. Everything was fine for a few days until my boyfriend's dad casually mentioned how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in something and needed a bath. I felt sick all over again, but thankfully everyone assumed it was some type of animal mess. Story 5. Picking up a man's head that fell off his deteriorating body when I worked at a mortuary transport company is definitely up there. Also, picking up a 5-year-old child who had a bookcase fall on him. Feeling all the broken bones moving in his tiny body affected me deeply. If we are talking behavior, I definitely attempted to damage friends' relationships in my teenage years because I was bitter and lonely. Seeing them happy only made me feel worse, so I wanted to drag them down to my level. Luckily, their relationships were stronger than my negativity in most cases. Edit. I have gotten a few messages asking questions about the mortuary job and whether or not these were the worst calls I ever had, so I figured I would post an old comment from a different thread. Trigger warning for Suic. I witnessed a woman pretty much collapse over the body of her son. I used to work for a mortuary livery service. I mostly picked up from retirement homes and from people's houses where a hospice nurse watched over them, but would occasionally get calls from the local coroner's office. One night I was sent out to a call not far from where I lived. The place was surrounded by police officers. They led me and my partner to the bathroom, where a man had ended his life with a shotgun in the shower. It was overwhelming, as you can imagine, but by this point it was not entirely out of the ordinary for me. I had picked up Suics before, as well as overdoses, individuals who had passed away sometime prior, and children, so I was pretty numb to it. We got him into a bag and loaded him onto the gurney, and we were out the door at the worst possible time. The man's mother was outside now, having been called by someone, I suppose. She started hysterically screaming, which immediately put me on edge. I had dealt with crying loved ones every day, even when I had to pick up the child. His parents were already escorted into another room. But those overwhelming screams right in front of me, this was a first. An officer tried to grab her, but she managed to pull away, running up to the gurney and pretty much collapsing onto it, sobbing uncontrollably and speaking incoherently. It was the most raw and unfiltered emotion I had ever seen. She was clutching onto the gurney and rocking back and forth, to the point that I had to grab the cart before the whole thing toppled over onto the front lawn. I stood there for around 5 minutes, with a front row seat to overwhelming pain, with no way to really step away, before an officer stepped in and tried to pull her away, saying that we had to take him. She eventually stepped back, and we got the body loaded into the car, and from there it was work as usual. The reason that one stayed with me so much is because, well, it felt like looking into my own future. I was suicidal at the time, and a shotgun in the shower was exactly how I planned to do it. The only reason I was waiting was because I wanted to be in my own place, so my roommate would not have to find me The man was even around my age. It was a strange feeling, almost like standing over my own body, and when I saw the woman's reaction, I could only imagine my own mom. It was at that moment that I decided my mom would never scream and cry like that because of something I did. While the feelings are still there, and I still think about death often, that night was when I decided I would never do it, no matter how much it hurt. What is difficult is that it almost made the pain worse. Before, I felt like I had an escape, a way to make everything stop, but after that I felt trapped. I did not want to live, but now I could not choose to die. It was overwhelming to accept. Story 6. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There are some wealthy people who live in the woods, and one of them had a child who went to our high school and bullied the kids who were not as wealthy. That individual grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest vehicle in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and drove laps around the town common during the tree lighting ceremony while people were singing and gathering. In the summer of last year, a friend and I decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard and they had recently gotten an old train horn from a damaged diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait for the right moment. A month or so later, we found out he was having a gathering with other wealthy people in his family, but we did not know what the occasion was, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and drove off before anyone knew what happened. News got out later, and we found out the event we interrupted was actually a wake for his late grandfather. Story 7. Sometimes you can do really upsetting things without any intent or awareness. I was young and with a very kind woman who was struggling with some physical issues that resulted in a severe depression. We were not living together, but I was regularly waking up early and going over to her place for breakfast and to check in and let her know I was there for her. I went drinking with some friends one night and I overslept the next morning. I called her to let her know I would not make it. She ended her life that day before I got back from work. I know now that what happened was not my fault and I was not responsible, at least not in any direct way, because we all make our own choices. Still, I will always wish I had not been careless and overslept that day. If I had the chance to change one decision I have made in my life, this would be it. Story 8. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for several reasons, and I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons I was struggling emotionally was because my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I was actively seeing this person I loved dearly lose his sense of self and his ability to understand conversations and situations. He was young, having just turned 50. There was a lot of hope in the beginning, but considering that glioblastoma is essentially a brain cancer without stages, it was almost guaranteed that he would lose the battle. The day that I stopped drinking altogether was the day I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check in. It was the only time I was asked to take on that level of responsibility, as his wife normally took him. I helped in many ways, like spending time with him when he would have otherwise been alone. But this appointment was especially important. I drank myself into a depressed state the night before and missed our meeting time. I had said I would be there no matter what, and I was not. The appointment happened and he tried to reassure me that it was okay because he knew the battle was almost over anyway. But I will never forgive myself for that. Even typing this makes me feel like I failed him deeply. I wish I had been sober then. Story 9. One time, a girl I had minimal interest in but shared mutual friends with sent me a message basically saying she had feelings for me and wanted to see where things could go. I then typed up a message to my good friend saying, "Please end this now. I think she wants a relationship." Keep in mind, this girl was kind and genuine, but she simply was not my type. I am also a people pleaser, so the thought of turning someone down made me uncomfortable, and I dreaded having to tell her I was not interested. I have been turned down before. It hurts. I did not want to do that to someone else. I did not mean the "please end this now" as an insult to her as a person, but as an expression of how anxious the situation made me. You can probably guess what happened. Yes, I sent the "please end this now" message directly to her. After realizing what I did and spending about 30 seconds trying to imagine a way to explain it without sounding like the biggest jerk in the world, I accepted that there was no way to make it sound good. I decided to do my best to explain that it was not meant to be cruel and express that she did not deserve that. It did not matter. I still cringe about it to this day. Story 10. I do not know if it is exactly terrible, but it is something that follows me and that I regret deeply. When I was in my late teens, I worked for a care company that went into people's homes to support them, mostly the elderly. I met many sweet, interesting, and sometimes difficult people, but my favorite was Joyce. I was a troubled kid with a difficult home life, and Joyce was well into her 80s, but somehow we just connected. She was a genuinely enjoyable person to spend time with, a real friend. I would start going to her home during my breaks rather than sitting in my car, and her voice would light up through the buzzer when she realized it was me. I would make her sandwiches and cups of tea, and we would smoke inexpensive cigarettes while she told me stories about her late husband building their home and how she had been a dressmaker who made clothing on the side for trans women or men who wanted to wear dresses, because in her words, who cares if you are not hurting anyone? She was wonderful. She was often my last visit of the night, so I would finish my shift and then stay late to style her hair. Joyce had daughters who lived nearby but rarely visited. I remember her saying they dropped off Christmas dinner in containers one time so it could be reheated in the microwave, and all I could think was, why was she not sitting at their table? She also mentioned another caregiver I had never met but whom she spoke highly of. It broke her heart when she found out he had been stealing from her. Joyce would ask me that, if I ever planned to quit the job, I would tell her first and not just leave. I promised I would, and that if I did quit, I would still come visit her. But I did not. I never saw her again. One night during a work shift, something happened and I was rushed to the hospital and had to abandon my shift. I managed to notify work in time, but I remained in the hospital for a while and then was unable to work for months. I never saw Joyce again, and in her eyes I abandoned her. And I suppose I did in a way. I thought about her often and considered visiting, but there was always something. I was recovering, my boyfriend was abusive, and later I wondered if she would even recognize me. It felt strange after so long. What if she had passed away? That was 12 years ago, and it still weighs on me at times. I saw a lot of upsetting things and spent time with many forgotten people. Call your grandparents, your parents, if you can. Story 11. My grandpa was retired early due to disability and watched me during the day all summer until I was 11 or 12 and could stay alone after school. He spoiled me completely. He took me to amusement parks, brought me to toy stores, all sorts of things. My parents told him to slow down because I was being entitled when I was 6 or 7. After this happened, I told my grandpa I wanted to go to the amusement park one day. He told me that my parents said no, but maybe we could go the next week or the week after. I became incredibly upset. Being the manipulative child I was, I put on the tears. He just said he was sorry and that he did not want to upset my parents. So I looked at him and said, "You just do not love me anymore, do you?" He became really sad after I said that and told me that he loved me very much, but we could not go. So I kept going, asking why he did not love me. Every time I said it, he became more and more distraught. Then he started to cry. I made my 56-year-old grandfather cry. The kindest man I have ever known. The image of him crying while saying, "Please do not say things like that," is so deeply imprinted in my mind. I think it was one of the most important moments of my childhood for my emotional development. At the time, I could not process it. I did not even apologize. I just went to my room. He did not even tell my parents what happened. My mom said that around that time, it seemed like I matured a decade. I was quiet, polite, and incredibly well-behaved. I treated my grandpa much better from that point forward. I could not bring myself to apologize for it until my late teens when he was dying of cancer, and I found out that he was not even blood-related to me. He was my mom's stepdad, just one of the best people humanity could offer, and I owe so much of who I have become to him. Edit. Thank you for the kind words, everyone. I am not outwardly emotional, but I cried a bit writing this in my office. I appreciate the tears shed on my and my grandpa's behalf. Story 12. This is a story of revenge. I have never told it before. It is upsetting, but I still think I was justified. Many years ago, I lived in Japan, where the English school business is significant. A good friend of mine had put years of work into developing his own curriculum, and I was his head teacher and helped develop several original educational textbooks for kids. He was ready to launch his school, but he needed financial backing because trying to incorporate in Japan as a foreigner is incredibly difficult. He found a local businessman to help finance the operation. My friend put down $50,000 and the local businessman put down $51,000, giving him controlling share. I am not sure what exactly happened. All I know is that the local businessman essentially pulled out at the last minute and took the $50,000 from my friend, and there was nothing my friend could do. This local businessman then decided to open the school entirely on his own and cut my friend out, using the material I had designed. This local businessman had never met me and did not know that I existed, so my friend suggested that I reply to the advertisement in the newspaper looking for a head teacher and try to get hired so we could bring the school down from the inside. I did, and I was hired as the head teacher and was put in charge of setting up all the classrooms, getting all the supplementary books, all of the toys and games, setting up the class schedules, and even setting up all the computers and software needed to run the business. Literally everything. I spent 3 months preparing to launch the school, building the curriculum, printing flyers, talking to parents of the kids, and signing them up for classes, the whole 9 yards. But 2 days before the school was set to open, I got my revenge. I threw all the computers into the garbage bin, which was collected the next day, and changed all the passwords for all the cloud services. I then threw out my cell phone and disappeared. Because this man was secretive, he always wanted to pay me in cash, so he did not have my bank information, did not have my actual mailing address, and I had given him a fake one to start with. So when I disappeared, he had no way to know who I was or how to find me. I found out later through others that this ended up costing that local businessman several $100,000, as he needed to pull money from his other businesses to refinance this one and basically start from scratch. He missed the beginning of the school year, and all of the parents he had contracted with were upset and canceled, and he was never able to get them back as clients. Essentially, I cost him an entire year. I do not regret it for a second because this man stole $50,000 from my friend and took advantage of young entrepreneurs who were just trying to start their business. He got what he deserved, and now I have a backstory as a corporate saboteur. Story 13, I used the litter box belonging to my sister's cat when I was 13. My sister was difficult. She was 5 years older than me and had always been a bigger girl. She was the favored child and got everything she wanted. I was quiet and kept to myself. She would take my underwear and use them during her period and then give them back to me stained, just to give you an idea of how unkind she was. I would complain to my parents, but they brushed me off, gave her a light warning, and ignored it otherwise. She kept taking my belongings, damaging them on purpose, and stretching out my clothes. I had finally had enough but did not know what to do to get back at her. She had a cat she adored and took very good care of. One day she was cleaning the litter box, and I asked her to give me my things back. She ignored me as usual. I was furious, overwhelmed with that sudden kind of anger that makes you do impulsive things. I do not know if it was timing or coincidence, but as soon as she left the room, I looked at the litter box and thought to myself, I am going to make her clean my mess. I proceeded to leave a large, unmistakably human mess in that box. It was obviously not from a cat. I was shocked when I saw it. I thought I would leave a small one, pass it off as the cat's, and get a quiet laugh knowing she had to scoop it. I refused to back down this time. My sister was going to clean it. I waited days for the reaction, but nothing happened. No scream from the laundry room, no worried talk of the cat being ill. I guess she just scooped it. She did not stop treating me poorly until she moved out 5 years later. But every time she did, I remembered that she had scooped that litter box, and it made things feel a little more bearable. Story 14. My friend and I were around 8 years old and were being watched by a neighbor. We somehow got hold of several boxes of matchbooks, so we started building rockets out of aluminum foil filled with match heads. When we ran out of material to build more rockets, we each took the last few packs of matches and started tossing them at each other, ripping off the match heads and striking them on the cover to fire them. We were chasing each other around the yard and got near another neighbor's house. They had one of those roll-up wooden reed sunscreens, the kind they now make out of plastic. A match got stuck between the reeds and started burning. Before we knew it, it was 1 inch around, then 3 inches around, then 6 inches around, and it would not go out. Soon the entire screen was burning from the bottom up, and soon after, the house itself seemed at risk. We ran and got a garden hose and somehow managed to put the fire out with only half the screen burned. We then went back into the house where we were supposed to be supervised and turned on the television until the fire department showed up. Being 8, we tried to deny everything until they pointed out our wet pant legs and the ashes still on our shoes. In the end, the neighbor did not press charges, but my dad paid for the repairs and used a belt to discipline me, as was common at the time. I do not blame him now. I have to admit that the punishment and the fact that we nearly caused a house fire made me understand the difference between right and wrong and taught me that my actions could impact other people. Story 15. When I was married, my former wife and I went to a bar with a couple she was close with. The wife of the couple made it very clear she did not like me and spent the evening making comments and taking as many verbal shots at me as she could. As she drank more, the insults became more frequent and harsher. My attempts to respond were stopped by her husband and by my former wife. I was expected to take it, but not respond. She went to the restroom, and as she got off her chair, the leg broke and she fell forward. My former wife and the other woman went to the restroom. The husband went to find the manager, and I swapped chairs with the table next to ours. I then told the manager that the injury, a broken nose, was not due to a broken chair, but because she had been drinking and lost her balance. Story 16. I was down at the shore celebrating my 21st birthday, so naturally I had been drinking the entire day. I went to some of the piers on the boardwalk to go on rides. As I was waiting in line, I suddenly really needed to use the bathroom. There are a few different piers, and I was on the third one, but in my drunken state, I thought I was on the second one. I knew where the bathroom was on the second pier, so I headed in that direction. I ended up walking into the closed water park section of the pier at night and panicked because I did not see a bathroom anywhere and could not hold it anymore. In my drunken state, I did what felt like my only option and used the lazy river. I felt guilty while doing it, but also thought at least no one would see me. Just then, one of the sky trolleys went by overhead. It passed directly above me, and people were looking down at me in the middle of everything. I felt like a character caught under a spotlight. I thought, I need to get out of here. So I finished quickly and ran back to my group, trying to act casual as though nothing had happened. Luckily, I was not caught, though I do feel bad for the people who went to the water park the next day. Story 17. When I was a junior in college, I lived in a house with some of my sorority sisters. One of them was dating my boyfriend, now my husband's roommate. The four of us were inseparable for about a year and a half. The other couple had a very volatile on and off relationship, and sometimes it apparently became physical. One night after we had all been to a party, my friend came to my door and told me she had just been arrested for assault. The story she told me was that her boyfriend was hurting her and strangling her. She said she punched him in self-defense and gave him a black eye. They were outside his fraternity house, so I guess someone saw them and called the police. She did not have visible injuries, so they only arrested her. In the following months, I supported her completely. I came to every court date, spoke as a character witness, cut off all of my friends in my boyfriend's fraternity because they sided with him. My now husband lost a lot of friends, as did I. His fraternity brothers vandalized our house. I helped her file reports with the college. It became a huge situation. The following semester, they got back together. I was furious. After everything I did to support her, it felt like a slap in the face. She became very angry that I was angry and eventually admitted she made up the abuse to get him in trouble. Months later, she pulled out a bunch of his hair and was arrested again, so I think the harm was actually going the opposite way. After everything I went through for her lies, I was devastated. All our sorority sisters took her side and said I was being unreasonable. I became depressed and missed a lot of classes. She and my housemates began using substances and selling substances from my house. I was trying to become a teacher, so I was terrified this was going to permanently affect my life. I worked on getting new housing, but it took time. One day I was home alone and saw her tablet, which she had won at a fundraising event at school. I do not know what came over me, but I took it and sold it online for $300. She never found out. I never told anyone until now. I just felt like in some way I was getting a small piece of justice for what happened. Thank you to anyone who read this. I have wanted to let it out for quite some time. Story 18. When I was in first grade, I bullied a kid with autism and used to take his lunch. He left the school after that year. I met him again in fourth grade while grocery shopping with my mom. He was there with his dad. He was excited to see me after 3 years. He hugged me and offered me a chocolate. I cried right there and refused it. I thanked him and told him I could not accept it for personal reasons and apologized for that moment. To this day, I regret my actions. I wish I had also apologized for bullying him when I saw him again in fourth grade. I have not met him since then. I hope he is well wherever he is. I have not bullied anyone else in my life. I do not know why I behaved that way in first grade. I never hit him, but I used to tease him in front of others and broke his water bottle 3 times. It still weighs on me sometimes, but I hope he has forgiven me and moved past the harm my actions caused him back then. Story 19. In the 1990s, I spent time with some skinheads. Separate from them, I found a store where the owner collected medals, patches, and similar items from the Second World War. He had items from the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, but mostly Germany. The man was very kind, like a grandfatherly figure. He was always smiling and collected them simply as a military enthusiast, not for any political reason. One day while we were talking, I let it slip that I knew someone with these kinds of medals. In that slip, I mentioned the store name. No comments were made and life continued. A couple of weeks later, one of the skinheads walked in at closing and killed the owner and another worker. He immediately fled but was later arrested and convicted. It affected me deeply, and while the crime was not my idea and I was not involved, I still cannot forgive myself. I left that environment right after. I am a completely different person today, far removed from racism or any nationalism that is so prominent today. People do not understand how dangerous even casual association can be when it involves hate groups. Story 20. While in school at lunch, in Ireland they allow older students to leave school property to go eat. I went home a 5-minute walk with about 5 friends. For whatever reason, and I still do not know why, we thought it would be a funny idea to have one of them use a plastic bag as a bathroom. One friend drew the shortest straw and went into my garden shed to do it. I remember him saying he could not go because he needed to pee. I told him just go in the bag too. It would be fine. Afterwards, we tied the very thin plastic bag and walked down a very narrow street with cars on both sides, swinging the bag around like we were about to lasso something. Not 5 minutes into the walk, a frustrated man said we were being too loud and told us to quiet down. Target acquired. One of my friends asked which car was his so we would not damage it with our loudness, clearly being sarcastic. The man actually pointed out his car and told us not to touch it. Without a second thought, my friend slapped the plastic bag as hard as he could onto the windshield of that car, and we all ran off as fast as we could. Story 21. I cheated on my wife a month after our 3rd son was born, and it still eats at me that I can never take that moment back. It happened in 2004, and even though we went through therapy, talked endlessly about the reasons and the fallout, and tried to rebuild everything piece by piece, I still do not feel like I can fully ask for forgiveness. I moved out back then, and we were trying to figure out what our marriage even meant anymore. One night I was at the house watching the championship series with the kids while we played, and she was sitting on the couch behind us. That was the year Boston came back from the brink to beat New York, and I think it was Game 7, though I cannot say for sure. She was never someone who enjoyed baseball on television, but during that postseason, she followed that team harder than I had ever seen. After the championship ended, I was outside working in the yard while the kids played, and she came out carrying a box. Inside was a team hat, which meant something because we live in Atlanta, and I had no attachment to Boston at all. Inside the hat was a note from her that said something like, "If Boston can come back and beat the odds, then maybe we can too, because I love you." I have kept that note in my wallet ever since, and it reminds me all the time that the rush of chasing something fleeting is never close to the feeling of finishing the long, hard race with the same person you began it with in the first place. Story 22. I did not try to save a 6-year-old child after they pulled him out of a pool, and I still think about that moment constantly because of how complicated everything felt. Where I live, there are strict laws about responsibility for victims, meaning that if you intervene to save someone, you become fully responsible for their well-being afterward, even financially, and the family does not have to do anything. They can even take legal action against you. The intention is to stop untrained people from attempting incorrect life-saving techniques, but in hindsight, it feels terribly ironic. I had only ever received a single first aid lesson in my life, and that had been 7 years earlier, so I did not feel confident that I could remember anything correctly enough to help without causing harm. I have trouble judging my own strengths sometimes. I break things easily without meaning to, and the thought of accidentally hurting a drowning child by pressing too hard or doing something wrong terrified me. Apparently, the other 30 to 50 people forming a circle around the child felt the same, or they were frozen with panic because everyone stood there moaning or crying, but nobody stepped in. Someone finally called emergency services, but they arrived after around 20 minutes, and by then, the child was already gone. I still feel haunted by it sometimes, and even though I remind myself that I might have made things worse, I cannot say with certainty that I should not have tried. Story 23. When I was 17 or 18 in high school, I had a very serious drinking problem and made decisions that could have ended my life or someone else's without me even realizing how dangerous I was being. I was dealing with a lot of things at home and struggling with trauma, so I used alcohol to self-medicate, which only made everything worse. One night I was driving drunk in a parking lot and backed into another vehicle, breaking the headlight and possibly damaging the bumper too, though I do not really remember clearly. I panicked and just drove away instead of doing the right thing. I told my parents that someone must have hit me, and I used hot water to pop out the dent in my own car so it looked like nothing had happened. I am 25 now, and while my life is much better and I no longer drink the way I used to, that moment still hits me with guilt every time I think about it. I wish I could somehow repay the person whose day I ruined, but I do not know who they were, and I have no way of finding them. Since high school, I have never again driven after drinking, not even after a single drink, because I cannot imagine ever repeating that kind of irresponsibility. It was an awful, reckless, immature thing to do. And even though I have grown since then, I know I deserve the guilt that comes with remembering it. Story 24. I once had some incredibly inconsiderate roommates, a younger couple, when my child was still very small. One day they ate nearly 2 weeks' worth of my child's food in a single afternoon, leaving me scrambling to figure out how I was going to feed my kid because I was on assistance at the time and had no money to replace anything they had taken. They kept doing things like that even after I confronted them. Then one month I got the cable bill and saw they had rented $300 worth of movies on my account, and they lied to my face denying it even though there was no other explanation. That was when I learned that you have to lock rentals and control everything when you live with people who have no boundaries. I found another friend to stay with, and one early morning, I quietly moved all my belongings out while they were still asleep. Afterward, I called the rental company and reported that they had 2 unauthorized roommates living there, a dog they were not supposed to have, and that they had been smoking in the house even though it was forbidden. These were things that had pushed me to move in the first place. The next day, they texted me asking if they could stay with me at my friend's place because they had received a 3-day eviction notice. I told them no, and I did not feel even a little bit guilty about it. Story 25. About 10 years ago, shortly after my divorce, I started dating a woman who was incredibly attractive, but also very shy. We went to a very nice restaurant together, and she wore a short dress that honestly could have passed for lingerie, but she felt confident in it and wanted to look good. A snobby couple sitting at the bar kept looking at her, whispering, laughing, and rolling their eyes like she had no business wearing something bold. She had not grown up in the United States, so her sense of what was considered revealing was different from what people in Texas usually expect. It was getting more and more obnoxious, and I felt terrible watching her shrink into herself because she had taken a chance and was being mocked for it by strangers. The bar had tall chairs, and the couple was sitting a little too far back and leaning forward awkwardly to eat. As we were leaving, I walked past them, hooked my leg around the man's chair, and yanked it out from under him. He hit his chin on the bar and fell to the floor, and a small scene broke out. I kneeled down like I was checking on him, but really I just stared while his wife started yelling. The restaurant manager came over, and since I was a regular, I greeted him by name and said I must have bumped the chair accidentally. Then I walked out, paid the valet, and went home with her to have a much-needed drink and reassure her that she looked amazing and deserved none of the judgment she got. Story 26. A bit of context first. My great-aunt, who was my grandmother's sister, was a true narcissist and needed every bit of attention on her at all times. If she felt ignored for even a moment, she would call my Nana and claim she was injured or sick or thought she was dying, and my Nana and my mom would rush over only for her to suddenly be perfectly fine and start berating them for their life choices or for not being at her beck and call, or she would deliberately take medication to make herself pass out. When I was in my early teens, my family had planned a big week-long vacation to the beach, which was a huge deal because we were poor and only did trips like that every few years. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, she found out and wanted us nearby to wait on her, so she decided to pull the same stunt again. My Nana went over, and I was so angry because she had ruined countless other things before, and I knew she was faking, so I said to my mom, I swear to God, if she ruins this trip, she had better be dying this time. Turns out she died that time, and I still cringe and feel awful about it to this day. Story 27. A girlfriend once gave me her childhood stuffed frog before I left for college, and I took it with me. When I went home for Christmas break, I found out she had cheated on me during that time. I was hurt, and she was remorseful and wanted to move past it, but I could not, so we broke up. After Christmas break, I returned to school, saw the stuffed frog on my pillow, stared at it for a moment, then tore its head off. Now, years later, my partner and I bought a stuffed bear as a housewarming thing, and he genuinely feels like part of the family. It is silly, but I do not care. I even used to draw comics about him, and I think stuffed animals matter a lot to kids and carry emotional weight into adulthood. This past Christmas, my partner was sent her childhood stuffed puppy, and seeing her emotional reaction made me feel horrible for robbing my ex of a future moment like that. I know it sounds stupid to a lot of people, and honestly, I am grateful that after more than 40 years of life, this is the worst thing I can think of doing, but I truly regret it. Story 28. Definitely the worst thing I ever did was cheat on my wife when we were newly married. Back then, I was a coca-addicted mess working at a nightclub, constantly surrounded by opportunities for casual, no-strings-attached encounters. I watched other married guys doing the same thing, which somehow made it feel acceptable to my narcissistic self in my 20s. I knew she would be hurt if she found out, but I had no idea how much it would devastate her until I saw her completely broken, depressed, and inconsolable. In my mind, I had thought that if she discovered it, she would yell, maybe cry, and then we would make up because that was how my family handled things and how television made it seem. Watching her pull at her hair and sob like her entire world had collapsed made me feel more guilt and shame than anything I had ever experienced. We divorced because of it, but a year later we remarried. That was in the early 2000s, and we are still together now with children and a genuinely solid marriage. I have not even entertained the thought of cheating since. Story 29. One time in college, one of my roommates sublet her room for the summer. One day I was doing a huge load of laundry, constantly going up and down the apartment building stairs. Whenever someone was doing laundry or stepping out briefly, we always left the door unlocked. It was obvious that I was doing laundry, and the sublet roommate had seen me several times. During one of my rounds back to the apartment, the door was locked, and my keys were inside my room. I knocked and rang the bell repeatedly with no answer. If you got locked out, you had to pay around $50 to $100 to borrow a replacement key or fob from the office. And if you ever lost it, it cost even more. So I had no choice but to go to the office, admit I was locked out, and pay the fee. I unlocked the door, went to my room to retrieve my keys, and returned the lone fob. I was furious that the sublet had locked me out and cost me my entire food budget for the month. I went to her room, found it unlocked, grabbed the first valuable thing I could find, which was her music player, and sold it online to make back my money and a little extra. She never apologized or mentioned anything about it being missing. Story 30. At a small backyard party, I took a dose of acid and did not tell anyone. Eventually, someone asked if somebody could drive them to get cigarettes, and I offered even though I had been drinking as well, because when you are tripping, you cannot even tell you are drunk. I drove the car down a busy road at close to 100 miles an hour most of the way there and most of the way back. On the return trip, I was going around 60 miles an hour on the neighborhood streets leading back to the house. Being as smart as I was at the time, I tried to take a right turn, and obviously the car could not handle that. The house on the far corner of that turn, directly across the street from the party, had a tall, slanted grass hill running down the entire side of their yard, maybe around 4 inches tall and angled. My car skidded around the turn, dragged along the hill, and ended up landing almost perfectly parked right on the curb. It made a massive amount of noise with the tires screeching and the bumper ripping off, in addition to the stereo I had blasting at full volume. My friends said they could hear me coming from blocks away. The only real damage was the front bumper and the grass hill. It was my mother's car too. I immediately made sure my passenger was okay and then walked straight to tell the people at the party that we were both fine. After that, I walked straight home and woke up my mom to tell her I had damaged her bumper, but was okay. She told me we would talk in the morning and went back to sleep. I returned to the party and kept partying. I am forever grateful I did not hurt anyone. The person who owned the house with the grass hill happened to be out of town, or I would have almost certainly ended up in jail. I count my lucky stars often that nobody was harmed. Story 31. Around a decade or so ago, I was dating a girl, and we were at a bonfire at her house with a handful of friends, plus her 2 brothers. We were all in our early to mid-20s. It was late, and I was very drunk. At some point, I went inside to use the bathroom, but then came back outside completely naked. There was a cheap above-ground pool about 30 feet from the fire where the girl I was dating was sitting. We ended up being intimate in the pool with our friends and her 2 brothers fully aware of it. That part honestly did not bother me much. After we were done, my drunk self decided to jump over the bonfire several times, still naked. Then I saw her younger brother sitting in a chair. I walked up behind him, slapped my private parts against his face, and said that it had just been with his sister. I had to be told all of this the next morning. I knew I had done something wrong, but could not remember the details. To this day, I do not drink straight tequila anymore. Story 32. In college, I had 2 roommates I eventually grew to despise. We started off well with me and then a guy and a girl who all knew each other in a friendly way. It was our senior year and everything seemed good. We helped each other with homework, watched television together nightly, and partied on weekends. After about 3 months, the guy was dumped by his girlfriend. Within 2 weeks, he and the girl in our apartment were constantly involved physically, and suddenly it became a 2-against-1 situation where I was overruled in everything. A month after that, right before finals for the fall semester of our senior year, they both dropped out. They continued living in the house and working part-time, and because they needed money, they started selling substances out of the house. Not just cannabis, since that did not make enough. They began moving coca and pharmaceuticals. This led to constant fights. By summer, we had only about 2 months left, and during that time, a friend of mine suddenly passed away. I was one of the people who found the body, and I came home completely shattered. I told my roommates I needed a few days of calm. Naturally, they immediately invited people over, partied all night, left the house trashed, and then left for a week-long camping trip. When I called the girl asking what was going on, she told me it was not her problem. So I threw away everything of theirs in the living room. The guy had paid for the substances, and I threw out about $3,000 worth of coca because he had left it on the table. As for the girl, she loved her hair and spent hundreds every month on products. I had access to the bathroom, and my friend who found the body with me knew how to pick locks. So every single one of her hair products we urinated in or did worse, like wiping ourselves and placing it in her conditioner. Before I did any of this, I took pictures and sent them to the landlord. By the time they moved back, I had already moved out. The guy threatened me over text, so I showed it to a police officer. Then the officer and I took a picture together, and I sent it to him. He replied with the usual, "Snitches get stitches." That was around 20 years ago, and it still makes me laugh. Story 33. My first job right after finishing high school when I was 18 was at a delivery company. I had a coworker who was sort of a friend, although we never hung out outside of work, and he had a history of spending time in prison. I did not really care that he had been incarcerated, but he had this way of staring intensely into your eyes in a very intimidating manner. I usually looked past it and avoided maintaining eye contact for long. One day we were unloading a truck together, and he had a necklace with a small capsule attached to it. He told me to turn around and not look while he opened it, and when I turned back, he was sniffling as if he had taken some kind of narcotic. We talked about what it was, and I told him I did not care and was not judging him because it was not my place to control anyone's choices. He jokingly asked if I wanted to try some. I took a small bit and did not feel much. Then I rubbed a little more on my gums, and that was my first experience with a stimulant other than coffee. I felt almost superhuman and tore through the packages in the truck at an insane speed. I do not touch anything like that anymore because I care about my brain and physical health, but it was undeniably a wild experience at the time. These days, the most I do is occasionally drink or smoke or vape. Story 34. When my daughter was first born, I told my dog to go die. She did. I was breastfeeding and waking every 2 hours to feed my daughter. I was sleeping with her in the bed and terrified of rolling onto her, so I barely moved at all while trying to rest, which meant I was getting almost no real sleep. At the same time, our dog was very old and diabetic, and she needed to go outside every 2 hours as well. The dog and the baby were cycling opposite of each other. One day I had just finished feeding my daughter and lay down to rest with her. The dog made her usual little scrabbling noise when she got up. I heard it and snapped, loudly saying, "Will you just die already?" She paused, then continued walking toward the door to ask to be let out. I let her outside and things seemed normal for a few hours. Later, when she was out in the yard, I noticed she could not rise from her squat. She could not get herself back up. My husband had just arrived home and ran to help her. She was clearly in a great deal of pain. I do not remember all the details now because I was beyond exhausted, but it was decided she needed to go to the veterinarian. The veterinarian recommended putting her to sleep due to how badly her condition had deteriorated. I told the dog to die, and she did. I have never felt worse in my life, and even after more than 20 years, I still regret saying those words. Story 35. There was a manager at my first job who constantly silly harassed the young women who worked there. He was a huge bully as well, almost like a caricature of a cruel factory boss from an older era. Unfortunately, he was also the brother of a wealthy and powerful politician. I started moving his belongings, taking items and leaving them in random places where he would eventually find them. I created an entire fake project, complete with documents and details, and he talked about it in an important executive meeting, leaving the shareholders confused because they had no idea what he was referring to. I changed the dates and times on his digital devices, altered details in his work calendar, and essentially gaslit him into believing he was losing his mind, fully aware that his family had a severe history of dementia. The thing is, while he was in this shaken state, which lasted around 7 months, he stopped harassing women and was too rattled to bully anyone. It escalated to the point where he had a minor mental breakdown and retired completely. I do not regret what I did. He was a genuinely harmful person, and the world is better with him isolated in his large home. I am fully aware it is the most disturbing thing I have ever done. Story 36. Well, I have done a lot of messed up things, but I will keep this one lighter. My mother shipped me to my father's house with 2 suitcases without warning when I was 11. My father, of course, took me in, but I think his wife was far less pleased about suddenly having a child in the house. Being an insecure 11-year-old in an unfamiliar environment, since my father lived in Florida and my mother lived in Ohio, and I only saw him maybe once a year, I clung to my father and vied for his attention out of a need for some kind of security. His wife started treating me like I was the other woman. She became controlling and jealous of any attention my father gave me. About a year later, after I gained a bit of confidence and found an okay friend group, she became extremely verbally abusive. She started telling my father exaggerated stories about me that barely resembled reality. For example, we lived in a very rural area, and there were exactly 3 kids within a mile I could hang out with, 1 girl and 2 brothers. We were all 12, and the boys were simply like brothers to us, nothing more. But she would see me walking with them, and when I got home, she would call me horrible names and accuse me of inappropriate behavior. My father worked long hours and never knew what was happening. Being a young girl who had just started her period, I was only allowed to use pads even though my father's wife used tampons. My cousins were coming to visit, and we had planned to go to a water park called Wikiwachi, but I had started my period. I knew better than to approach my father's wife, so I went to the school nurse. She introduced me to tampons, took her entire lunch break to teach me how to use them safely. And thanks to her, we had a great trip. A week or two later, I woke up to my father's wife throwing her empty coffee cup at my headboard. She said she noticed she did not have to buy pads for me that month and demanded to know immediately what I used. When I told her, she exploded and made awful accusations, to the point where my father finally stepped in and stopped it. The next morning, after my father left for work, she dragged me to the master bathroom and, as punishment for going behind her back, took out a pair of shears and chopped off my waist-length hair up to my earlobes. My father was furious, but the damage was done. Now the good part. She had a ritual of using a hair removal cream on her legs while washing her hair in the sink. Feeling vindictive, I emptied half her shampoo bottle and filled it with half the hair removal cream. At 12, I did not really think about the science behind it. I just imagined the glorious moment of her going bald. I do not think the mixture stayed in her hair long enough to cause major damage, but there were bald spots and breakage. As an adult, I feel guilty about it now, but at the time I felt like some kind of avenging angel. Story 37. When I was in college, a guy who lived next door in a 5-person apartment was genuinely unpleasant. All of his roommates from his fraternity disliked him. I disliked him too because he was simply an awful person. One day in February, he left his car window cracked open, even though it was around 10 degrees outside. His roommates and I each relieved ourselves into his car through the open window. The next morning, as I was getting into my car to go to class, I witnessed him open his car door, sit down, and scream that his entire car smelled like urine. A few years later, I saw him working at a store while I was there picking up a video game. He saw me and gave me an unpleasant smile. He told me that one night he had opened our front door and relieved himself in our entryway. I told him it was fine because the night of that party, all of us, including his own roommates, had relieved ourselves in his car. I told him we had each gone multiple times because we had been drinking heavily. His face turned bright red, and I told him to have a wonderful day. Story 38. When I was 17 and in basic training for the British Army, we went to Cornwall for what they called adventure training. This usually meant rope courses, climbing, abseiling, kayaking, and mountaineering. One day we were training on cliffs at the coast, at an inlet where the sea rushed in below, and the opposite cliff was about 20 meters away. We had 2 ropes stretched between the cliffs, hanging over the rocks and waves 50 meters below. We were practicing how to cross using just one rope for the crossing and the other as a safety rope you clipped into with a carabiner in case you fell. You would lie on the rope and pull yourself and your gear across to the other side. The hardest part was learning how to regain, which meant pulling yourself back up onto the rope if you slipped and ended up hanging beneath it. It is extremely difficult, especially with full gear. We had been practicing for hours, and for reasons I still do not understand, the instructor decided to make a full crossing with a regain without clipping into the safety rope. If he had fallen, he would have died. It was reckless for anyone, but especially for an instructor whose job was safety. At the time, we thought he was wild in the kind of way we admired because we were young and foolish. The unofficial currency in the British Army then was the crate, meaning a crate of lager. Mess up and you owed a crate. Lose a dare and you owed a crate. Someone did you a favor, you bought him a crate. When the instructor climbed up the far cliff, he shouted that he would buy a crate for anyone who could do what he had just done. Before he even finished speaking, I was on the rope, sliding out over the drop. I completed the regain and climbed up the far side. Instead of praise, the instructor punched me in the chest and yelled at me for almost getting him sent to prison. He still bought the crate, though. When I got back to the main camp, I realized how unbelievably foolish I had been. I was reminded of it many times, loudly and privately, by non-commissioned officers and officers. The older I get, now in my 40s, the more I look back on the things I did when I was young, and the more they terrify me compared to how invincible I felt back then.